I'm going to tell you something I've never said out loud before. Not to colleagues, not to the journalists who covered the foundation scandal, not even to the therapist I saw for 6 months after everything went public, but I need to say it now, because carrying it alone has become its own kind of weight. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I used to believe the world was fundamentally fair, not perfect, but fair enough that hard work and honesty would eventually win out. I believed that until I was 17 years old, sitting in a principal's office while a woman in a designer suit explained why my scholarship application was being suspended pending an investigation into academic fraud. I believed it until the day my grandfather died, because we couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved him. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. I grew up in a small house on Maple Street in a town so unremarkable that even people who lived there struggled to describe what made it special. The house was a one-story ranch with vinyl siding that had faded from white to the color of old newspaper. The yard was mostly dirt and crabgrass. Inside, the furniture was a mismatched collection of things my grandfather had picked up at estate sales over the decades. A brown corduroy couch with one cushion permanently compressed, a kitchen table with uneven legs that we'd shimmed with folded cardboard, a television so old it had dials instead of buttons. My grandfather, who I called Grandpa even though he insisted I should call him by his first name once I turned 13, ran a small automotive repair shop 2 miles from the house. The shop was even less impressive than our home. A converted garage with 2 bays, an ancient hydraulic lift that groaned like it was in pain every time you raised it, and walls covered in calendars from parts suppliers dating back to 1987. He specialized in older cars, the kind people held onto because they couldn't afford new ones. He charged less than the chain shops in the next town over. Sometimes, when customers couldn't pay, he'd accept whatever they could offer: a case of motor oil, some tools, a promise to help him re-roof the shop when summer came. He wasn't good at business, but he was good at fixing things. I came to live with him when I was 6 years old. My parents died in a car accident on Interstate 40. A truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and crossed the median. It was instant, according to the police report I read years later when I was old enough to request it. My grandfather never talked about it. He just showed up at the foster home where I'd been placed temporarily, signed some papers, and brought me back to the house on Maple Street. He set up a bed for me in the spare room, which had been his workshop. He moved his tools and half-finished projects to the garage. He bought a nightlight shaped like a baseball because someone at the hardware store told him kids liked sports. I didn't play baseball, but I kept that nightlight for years, long after I stopped being afraid of the dark, because it was the first thing anyone had bought specifically for me after my parents died. Grandpa worked 6 days a week. On Sundays, we'd drive to a diner called Rosie's, where he'd order eggs and hash browns, and I'd get pancakes with too much syrup. He'd read the newspaper while I did homework or drew pictures on the pauper placemats. The waitress, an older woman named Danielle, who'd worked there for 30 years, would bring me extra napkins without being asked because she knew I'd make a mess. That was my childhood. Quiet, simple, safe. Grandpa taught me how to use tools before I learned multiplication tables. By the time I was 8, I could change oil, rotate tires, and diagnose a misfiring engine by sound alone. By 12, I was rebuilding carburetors and helping him with brake jobs. He never made me work. I wanted to. The shop was where we talked, really. Talked about things that mattered. He'd explain how an engine worked while his hands moved through the mechanical ballet of disassembly, and I'd understand that he was teaching me something deeper than automotive repair. He was teaching me that everything broken could be fixed if you were patient enough to understand how it worked. People think mechanics are just grease monkeys, he told me once while we were replacing a timing belt on a 1994 Honda Accord. but we're problem solvers. Every car that rolls in here is a puzzle. You gotta listen to what it's telling you. Look at the evidence. Test your theories. Same as being a detective. Same as being a scientist. I took that seriously. Maybe too seriously. In school, I was the kid who sat in front, who finished homework during lunch so I wouldn't forget to do it later, who volunteered for extra credit projects nobody else wanted. Not because I was naturally gifted, I wasn't. I was average at best, but I worked. I worked the way. Grandpa worked on engines that other mechanics had given up on, methodically, relentlessly, with the understanding that effort, applied consistently over time, could overcome almost any obstacle. My grades were good, not exceptional, but solid. A's and B's, with the occasional C in subjects that didn't click for me no matter how many hours I spent on them. Teachers liked me because I tried. They wrote recommendations that used words like diligent and conscientious and determined. Nobody ever called me brilliant or gifted. Those words were reserved for other students. Students like Brandon Prescott. Millbrook High School sat on 12 acres of carefully maintained grounds on the east side of town, where the houses got bigger and the lawns got greener. It was a sprawling brick building with a football field that had stadium seating and lights for night games, a performing arts center that hosted regional competitions, and a science wing funded by a donation from a local pharmaceutical company. The parking lot had a section reserved for seniors where you'd see BMWs and Audis and the occasional Mercedes alongside the beat-up Hondas and Fords that kids like me drove. I drove Grandpa's 1998 Ford Ranger, the truck he used for parts runs. It was brown, dented, and burned oil. I parked in the back lot, as far from the senior section as possible. The social hierarchy at Millbrook wasn't subtle. You could see it in where people sat at lunch, which clubs they joined, whose parties got talked about on Monday mornings. At the top were the kids whose families had money, real money, not just comfortable money. They wore clothes that looked casual, but cost more than my monthly food budget. They talked about summer homes and ski trips and college tours that involved flights to different states. Brandon Prescott was at the center of that world. He was tall, athletic, with the kind of effortless confidence that came from never having to worry about whether you belonged somewhere. He played varsity lacrosse, served as treasurer of the student government, and maintained a 4.2 GPA while somehow always looking relaxed. His mother, Vanessa Prescott, ran a family foundation that funded various charitable causes throughout the state. His father owned a commercial real estate development company. The Prescott name was on a building at the local community college and a wing of the hospital. Brandon wasn't cruel exactly. He was worse than that. He was casually indifferent to anyone outside his orbit. He'd walk past you in the hallway without seeing you. He'd talk over you in class discussions without realizing he'd interrupted. He existed in a bubble where his reality was the only reality that mattered. We'd been in the same school since freshman year, but I doubt he knew my name until junior year, when we ended up in the same AP physics class. The teacher, Mr. Caldwell, was one of those rare educators who actually cared about the subject he taught. He made physics interesting by connecting it to real-world applications, how bridges were designed, how rockets achieved orbit, how automotive suspension systems absorbed shock. I loved that class. For the first time, school didn't feel like something I was enduring to get somewhere else. It felt like preparation for the thing I actually wanted to do. I wanted to be an engineer. Not because I'd had some dramatic revelation, or because someone had told me I'd be good at it. I wanted it because it felt like the natural extension of everything Grandpa had taught me. Engineering was problem-solving at scale. It was understanding systems, identifying weaknesses, building solutions that would last. It was the intellectual version of what we did in the shop every day. There was just one problem. Engineering school was expensive, really expensive. Even state schools cost more than Grandpa and I could afford. He'd saved what he could over the years, but most of his income went to keeping the shop running and keeping us fed. I'd worked part-time jobs since I was 14, stocking shelves at a grocery store, mowing lawns, helping at the shop, but my savings were modest. We'd need scholarships, a lot of them. That's when I learned about the Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship. It was a full-ride scholarship to any accredited engineering program in the state, awarded annually to one graduating senior based on academic achievement. A portfolio of projects, letters of recommendation, and an interview. The scholarship was funded by the estate of a local industrialist who'd built his fortune in manufacturing and wanted to help students from modest backgrounds pursue technical careers. It was perfect. It was designed for someone like me. I started preparing in the fall of my junior year. I rebuilt the engine of a 1972 Volkswagen Beetle from the ground up, documenting every step with photographs and detailed notes about the engineering challenges I encountered. I designed a rainwater collection system for the school's community garden, creating AutoCAD drawings and water flow calculations. I volunteered as a tutor for underclassmen struggling with math and science, collecting letters from students I'd helped. I worked on that portfolio the way Grandpa worked on the most challenging repairs, with total focus, refusing to cut corners, checking and rechecking everything. By the spring of senior year, I had a portfolio I was genuinely proud of. It wasn't flashy, but it was thorough. It showed real work, real problem solving, real dedication to engineering principles. I submitted my application in March, 2 weeks before the deadline. Mr. Caldwell wrote me a recommendation that, according to him, was the best he'd written in 15 years of teaching. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Rivera, who had helped me navigate the application process, told me I had a real shot. I believed her. I shouldn't have. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, in mid-April. I was in the shop with Grandpa, helping him replace a water pump on a Chevy Suburban, when my phone rang. It was Mrs. Rivera, asking me to come to the school the next morning before classes started. She wouldn't tell me why, just that it was important, and that I should bring my parents or guardian. Grandpa wiped his hands on a shop rag and said he'd come with me. We arrived at 7:30 the next morning. The main office was quiet, just a few staff members preparing for the day. Mrs. Rivera met us at the door, and her expression told me this wasn't going to be good news. She led us to a small conference room where 3 people were waiting. Principal Wallace, a middle-aged man in a suit I didn't recognize, and Vanessa Prescott. My stomach dropped. Principal Wallace introduced the man in the suit as Mr. Thornton, the director of the scholarship committee that administered the Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship. He had salt and pepper hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of neutral expression that professional bureaucrats cultivate. Nothing hostile, nothing warm, just aggressively blank. He got straight to the point. "We've received concerns about your scholarship application," he said, opening a folder in front of him. "Specifically, questions have been raised about whether some of the work in your portfolio was actually completed by you, or whether you had substantial assistance that wasn't properly disclosed." I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. "What?" I managed. "There are elements of your submission that seem inconsistent with your academic profile," he continued, as if reading from a script. "The AutoCAD drawings, for instance, show a level of proficiency that your transcripts don't reflect. You haven't taken any computer-aided design courses. The rainwater system calculations involve fluid dynamics concepts typically taught at the college level. And the engine rebuild, while impressive, raises questions about whether this was truly independent work or collaborative work with your grandfather's shop." I started to speak, but he held up a hand. "I want to be clear. We're not making any accusations. We're simply conducting due diligence. The scholarship is highly competitive, and we have a responsibility to ensure all applications meet our standards for originality and independent effort. I did all of that work myself, I said. My voice sounded strange, too high and too defensive. Every single piece. I learned AutoCAD from YouTube tutorials, the fluid dynamics. I taught myself from a college textbook I checked out from the library. The engine rebuild was my project. My grandfather supervised, but I did the actual work. Can you prove that? Vanessa Prescott asked. It was the first time she'd spoken. Her voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of concern that sounded practiced. She was dressed in a cream-colored blazer and pearl necklace, her blonde hair pulled back in a way that probably required a professional stylist. She looked at me with an expression of sympathetic doubt, like a doctor about to deliver bad news. The burden of proof, she continued, is on the applicant. The scholarship is based on individual merit and demonstrated capability. If there's any question about whether the work is truly yours, we can't in good conscience award the funding. Surely you understand that. I have receipts for the parts I bought, I said, turning to Mr. Thornton. Time-stamped photos of the build process, notes from the tutorials I followed. I can show you. Those things don't prove you did the work, Mrs. Prescott interrupted gently. They prove someone did the work, and given your family situation. She glanced at my grandfather, who sat rigid in his chair, his weathered hands folded on the table. It's understandable that you might have received help. No one is saying you intended to deceive anyone. Sometimes families want to support their children so badly that they blur the lines without realizing it. The implication hung in the air like smoke. She was calling my grandfather a liar, calling me a fraud, and she was doing it with a smile. This is ridiculous, I said, and I could hear my voice starting to shake. I didn't cheat. I didn't have anyone do my work for me. Everything in that portfolio is mine. Then you should welcome an investigation, she said. If the work is truly yours, you have nothing to worry about. Mr. Thornton cleared his throat. Given the concerns that have been raised, we're suspending your application pending a thorough review. This is standard procedure. We'll be conducting interviews with your teachers, examining your previous coursework, and potentially asking you to complete a demonstration project under supervised conditions to verify your capabilities. How long will that take? Mrs. Rivera asked. These things can't be rushed, Mr. Thornton said. Thoroughness is essential. Could be a few weeks. Could be longer. I felt Grandpa's hand on my shoulder, heavy and warm. Who raised these concerns? He asked. His voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. Mr. Thornton and Mrs. Prescott exchanged a glance. The committee received the information anonymously, Mr. Thornton said. We can't disclose the source. Convenient, Grandpa said. I understand this is frustrating, Principal Wallace interjected, speaking for the first time. But the committee has policies they have to follow. Let's all take a breath and let the process work. The meeting ended shortly after that. We were told the investigation would begin immediately and that I'd be contacted within a week with next steps. As we left the conference room, I saw Mrs. Prescott checking her phone, already moving on to whatever was next in her day. In the parking lot, Grandpa stopped and looked at me. Did you do the work? He asked. Yes, I said. Every bit of it. He nodded once. Then we'll prove it. But even as he said it, I could see something in his face that scared me more than Mrs. Prescott's accusations, a kind of exhausted recognition, like he'd seen this movie before and knew how it ended. The investigation lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks during which my entire senior year collapsed like a building with a faulty foundation. Word spread quickly. I don't know who talked. Maybe someone in the office. Maybe Mrs. Prescott herself. But by Friday afternoon, everyone seemed to know that my scholarship application was under investigation for fraud. The rumor mill transformed the story with each retelling until it bore little resemblance to reality. Some versions had me buying the portfolio from someone online. Others claim my grandfather had done all the work and I had just put my name on it. The most vicious version, which I heard from a girl in my English class who thought she was being helpful by warning me, was that kids without real families always try to cheat their way up. That phrase stuck in my head like a splinter I couldn't dig out. The investigation itself was humiliating. Mr. Thornton brought in a panel of engineering professors from the state university to review my portfolio. They interviewed me for 2 hours, asking increasingly technical questions about AutoCAD commands, fluid dynamics principles, and engine specifications. I answered everything to the best of my ability, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. One professor kept asking variations of the same question. Did anyone help you with this? Did you consult with any professionals? Did your grandfather review your work? Yes, I said. My grandfather reviewed my work, because that's what responsible adults do. They check to make sure teenagers aren't making catastrophic errors. That didn't mean he'd done the work for me. The professor made a note on his clipboard and moved to the next question. They asked me to complete a demonstration project, a supervised exercise where I'd design a simple mechanical system using AutoCAD while they watched. I sat in a computer lab for 4 hours, creating a basic pulley system with force calculations, while 3 professors stood behind me watching my every move. It felt like taking a test you'd already failed, just going through the motions to satisfy some bureaucratic requirement. Teachers started looking at me differently. Some were supportive. Mr. Caldwell, in particular, went to bat for me, writing a supplemental letter to the committee explaining that my work in his class had always been exceptional and clearly my own. But others, people I'd thought respected me, suddenly seemed uncertain. I caught Mrs. Montgomery, the calculus teacher, looking at my homework with an expression I'd never seen before, like she was searching for evidence of cheating she'd previously missed. The worst part was watching how people responded to Brandon Prescott. He'd also applied for the Whitman Scholarship. I'd known that. Everyone knew that. He had the grades, the extracurriculars, the recommendation letters from people whose names carried weight. His portfolio focused on sustainable energy, with detailed proposals for solar panel installations and wind energy feasibility studies for our region. It was impressive work, the kind of thing that would photograph well in scholarship announcement materials. During those 3 weeks, while I was being investigated, I watched Brandon move through the hallways like nothing was happening. Teachers congratulated him on his recent acceptance to Cornell. The lacrosse team celebrated him after a tournament win. He gave a speech at an assembly about leadership and integrity that got a standing ovation. And I sat in the back of the auditorium, watching, understanding with perfect clarity what was actually happening. This wasn't about the quality of my work. It was about who I was versus who he was. It was about a kid from Maple Street with a mechanic grandfather versus a Prescott with a family foundation and a mother on the scholarship committee. It was about making sure the scholarship went to someone who looked right, someone whose success would reflect well on everyone involved. They were going to give it to Brandon. They'd probably decided that before the investigation even started. The investigation was just theater, a way to disqualify me without having to say the quiet part out loud. That kids like me didn't deserve opportunities like this. No matter how hard we worked, I should have kept quiet. I should have played along, let the process run its course, and focused on finding other scholarships. But I was 17 and angry and so tired of being dismissed. And when you're 17 and angry, you make catastrophic mistakes. The mistake happened on a Friday afternoon, during what was supposed to be my final interview with Mr. Thornton. I'd spent the previous night barely sleeping, running through potential questions and responses, trying to prepare for whatever trap they'd set. Grandpa had made me breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and told me to stay calm, answer honestly, and remember that the truth was on my side. The truth was not, it turned out, particularly interested in taking sides. Mr. Thornton's office was in a professional building downtown, the kind of place with marble floors and landscape paintings in the lobby. He sat behind a heavy oak desk, my portfolio spread out in front of him, and explained in his carefully neutral voice that the committee had completed their review. "The panel was impressed with your technical knowledge," he said. "Your demonstration project was competent. Your understanding of the concepts in your portfolio appears genuine." I felt a tiny spark of hope. "However," he continued, and that one word snuffed it out, "there remain concerns about the level of assistance you received. Several elements of your work, particularly the AutoCAD drawings and the rainwater system, demonstrate capabilities that don't align with your formal education. While we can't prove misconduct, we also can't definitively confirm that all work was entirely your own." "I've explained how I learned," I started. "Yes, you've told us about YouTube tutorials and library books. But without documented evidence of that learning process, without records of your progress over time, we're left with a portfolio that appeared quite suddenly with no clear developmental trail. The scholarship requires not just capability, but demonstrated independent achievement. Given the questions that have been raised, the committee has decided to err on the side of caution." "You're denying my application," I said flatly. "We're suspending it pending additional documentation. If you can provide more substantial proof of your independent work, perhaps by completing a new project from scratch, with documented oversight, we'd be willing to reconsider." "When?" "The scholarship is being awarded next month. Unfortunately, the timeline for the current award cycle is passed. You'd be able to apply again next year if you're still interested." "Next year?" "After the scholarship had already been given to someone else. After I'd already committed to a school based on financial aid packages that didn't include a full ride. After the moment had passed and the opportunity was gone, I stood up. 'This is bullshit,' I said." Mr. Thornton's expression didn't change. "I understand you're disappointed. Brandon Prescott is going to get this scholarship, isn't he?" Now something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, that I'd said it out loud. "The committee doesn't discuss ongoing applications. His mother is on the committee. She's the one who raised the concerns about my application, isn't she? This whole investigation was designed to disqualify me, so he'd have a clear path." "That's a serious accusation," Mr. Thornton said, his voice cooling. "One I'd suggest you reconsider making." "Is it true?" "Mrs. Prescott has recused herself from the final decision precisely to avoid any appearance of impropriety. The vote will be conducted by the remaining committee members." "The remaining committee members who she selected, who she works with, who know exactly what decision she wants them to make." "This meeting is over," Mr. Thornton said, standing. "I'd strongly advise you to accept the committee's decision with grace, rather than making baseless accusations that could damage your reputation further." I should have left. I should have walked out of that office, gone home, and figured out my next move. But the anger that had been building for 3 weeks finally broke through whatever filter of politeness and deference I'd been using. "You want to talk about reputation?" I said. "Fine. I'm going to file a formal complaint. I'm going to document every step of this process and send it to every newspaper, every education board, every organization that might care that a scholarship committee is rigged to benefit the children of its own members. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of operation you're running." Mr. Thornton's face went very still. "I'd think very carefully before pursuing that course of action," he said quietly. "You're a bright young man with a future ahead of you. Making enemies of people who could help you is not a wise strategy. And filing false complaints, attempting to damage the reputation of a respected charitable organization out of spite, that could have consequences you haven't considered." It was a threat, not even thinly veiled, and like an idiot, I ignored it. I went to the local newspaper first. I called the education reporter and explained the situation, laying out my timeline, the investigation, the committee composition, Mrs. Prescott's role. The reporter listened, took notes, and said she'd look into it. She never called back. I tried the school board next, filing a formal complaint about conflicts of interest in scholarship administration. I got a form letter in response, thanking me for my input and assuring me that all scholarship programs operated in accordance with state guidelines. I posted about it on social media, carefully avoiding names but making the situation clear enough that anyone who was paying attention would understand what I was talking about. The post got 17 likes and 3 comments, 2 of which were from my grandmother's friends, saying they were praying for me. Nothing happened, nothing changed. What I'd thought was a crusade for justice turned out to be exactly what Mr. Thornton had warned me it would be. A teenager making noise that no one with power cared about. But the noise itself had consequences. The blowback started small. Mr. Caldwell pulled me aside after class and gently suggested that I move forward rather than looking backward. Mrs. Rivera stopped making eye contact when I passed her in the hallway. The guidance counselor who'd helped me with my college applications suddenly became very busy whenever I tried to schedule meetings. Then Brandon Prescott approached me. It was a Tuesday morning between 3rd and 4th period. I was at my locker, trying to decide if I actually needed the chemistry textbook for a class I'd basically checked out of, when I heard his voice behind me. "Hey man, can we talk?" I turned. He stood there in his lacrosse warm-up jacket, hands in his pockets, looking concerned in a way that seemed rehearsed. "About what?" I asked. "About all this scholarship stuff. Look, I heard what you're saying, and I get that you're frustrated, but you're kind of making things weird for everyone. Like, accusing my mom of rigging the process? That's pretty heavy. She's been volunteering with that committee for years. She cares about helping students. She cared enough to launch an investigation into my application while you were applying for the same scholarship. Because there were legitimate questions," he said, and now there was an edge to his voice. "Questions other people raised. She didn't make that up. And yeah, maybe she should have mentioned earlier that I was applying too, but that doesn't mean the whole thing is corrupt. It just means you're looking for someone to blame because you didn't get what you wanted." "I didn't get what I earned," I said. "According to who? You? Look, I'm sorry you're having a tough time. I am. But going around telling everyone the system is rigged just because things didn't work out for you, that's not a good look. It makes you seem bitter, unstable." The word hit like a slap. "Unstable? That's what people are saying," he said, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor by sharing this inside information. "That you're lashing out, making wild accusations, that maybe you're dealing with some stuff at home that's affecting your judgment. My mom even said she was worried about you, that maybe you needed to talk to someone." I stared at him. He looked back with what seemed like genuine concern, and I realized he actually believed what he was saying. In his world, the world where everything had always worked out, where doors opened because of who you were and not what you did, my anger didn't make sense. Of course I hadn't gotten the scholarship. I'd been caught cheating. Of course the investigation was legitimate. Why else would there be an investigation? Of course his mother was just doing her job. She was a Prescott, and Prescotts were good people who did good things. The possibility that the system was designed to protect people like him at the expense of people like me simply didn't exist in his framework for understanding reality. "We're done talking," I said. "Fine, but you should think about what you're doing. You're burning bridges you might need someday." He walked away, already pulling out his phone to text someone about whatever Brandon Prescott's texted about. He was right about one thing. I was burning bridges. Teachers who'd written me recommendations started avoiding me. College counselors stopped returning my emails. Students I'd considered friends suddenly had other places to be when I showed up. Even kids who didn't know the details sensed something had gone wrong, that I'd crossed some invisible line and become toxic by association. At lunch, I sat alone. The scholarship was awarded in late May at a ceremony in the Millbrook High Auditorium. I didn't attend, but I heard about it from every possible source. Brandon Prescott received the Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship. His mother presented it to him on stage. The local newspaper ran a photo of them together, him holding an oversized check, her beaming with pride. The caption called it a celebration of merit and hard work. I stayed home that night, working in the shop with Grandpa, who didn't say anything about the ceremony. We replaced a clutch on an old Ford Escort, and the familiar rhythm of mechanical work, remove, inspect, replace, test was the only thing that felt real. But something had broken inside the routine. Around the time the scholarship investigation started, Grandpa had begun having what he called bad days. Days where he'd move a little slower, where he'd sit down more often, where the color would drain from his face and he'd have to pause and catch his breath. He'd wave off my concern, blame it on age, promise he'd see a doctor when things slowed down at the shop. Things at the shop never slowed down. In June, right after graduation, he collapsed while working on a brake job. One of his regular customers, Mr. Wallace, who owned the hardware store, found him unconscious on the shop floor and called 911. I got the call while I was bagging groceries at my part-time job. By the time I got to the hospital, the tests were already running. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, metastasized to the liver, inoperable. The doctor, a tired-looking woman named Dr. Harlow, explained it to us in a consultation room that smelled like antiseptic and stale coffee. She used words like advanced and limited options and palliative care. She talked about timelines, 6 months, maybe less, and treatment plans that would focus on comfort rather than cure. Grandpa sat in the chair beside me, his weathered hands folded in his lap, and listened without expression. When Dr. Harlow finished, he asked only one question. "How much will treatment cost?" She hesitated. "With insurance, it depends on which interventions we pursue." "Without insurance." "Mr. I'm sorry, but I don't have exact numbers without reviewing." "Ballpark." She looked at her hands. "The chemotherapy regimen we'd recommend runs about 10 to 15,000 per month. Pain management, home care support, hospice services when needed. You could be looking at somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 over the course of treatment. But Medicare should cover." "I'm not old enough for Medicare yet," Grandpa said. "And the shop insurance, it's not great." I felt like I was watching this conversation from very far away, through the wrong end of a telescope. "There are payment plans," Dr. Harlow said gently, "and resources for patients facing financial hardship. No one should have to choose between treatment and—" "Thank you, doctor," Grandpa said, standing. "We'll figure it out." We didn't figure it out. The shop insurance, a bare-bones, catastrophic plan he'd bought years ago, when he'd still been young enough to feel invincible, covered almost nothing. We applied for assistance programs, but the forms were labyrinthine and the wait times were measured in months we didn't have. I took on extra shifts at the grocery store, but minimum wage couldn't make a dent in medical bills measured in tens of thousands. Grandpa kept working. He'd go to the shop in the morning, work until he couldn't anymore, come home and sleep for 14 hours. On good days, he'd manage almost a full shift. On bad days, he'd make it maybe 3 hours before the pain drove him back to the house. He refused to close the shop. People needed their cars fixed, he said, and we needed the money. I should have been in college that fall. I'd been accepted to the state engineering school with a partial scholarship that would have covered tuition but not room and board. The financial aid package had assumed I'd get additional scholarships to cover the gap. Scholarships like the Whitman, which would have made everything work. Without it, the numbers didn't add up. I deferred enrollment, told the school I'd start the following year, told myself it was temporary, just until Grandpa stabilized and we figured out the medical bills. I knew I was lying. In October, Grandpa had his first emergency room visit. Severe abdominal pain that turned out to be a partially blocked bile duct, a complication of the tumors pressing on surrounding tissue. They wanted to keep him overnight for observation and pain management. The hospital bill for that single night was $11,000. When he saw the invoice, Grandpa made a decision. No more hospitals, he said. We can't afford it. We can't afford not to. Yes, we can. We make choices. I've had a good life. You've got yours ahead of you. That money you're spending on keeping me alive, that's supposed to be for your future. I don't care about my future if you're not here. Then you're not thinking clearly. We fought about it, rare for us. I argued that we'd find a way, that we couldn't just give up, that there had to be something we could do. He argued that I was being selfish, that I was spending resources on a losing battle while my own life waited on pause. You think I want to die? He finally said, his voice raw. You think this is easy for me? But I'm 73 years old with terminal cancer. You're 18 with your whole life ahead of you. The math isn't complicated. The math is bullshit, I said. The math, he replied quietly, is the only thing that's honest. He stopped treatment, stopped the chemotherapy that made him violently sick and bought maybe a few extra weeks of pain. Stopped the medications, except for the painkillers that at least made the end bearable. Stopped fighting. I kept working double shifts at the grocery store, kept trying to keep the shop running, kept telling myself there was a way through this that didn't end with me losing the only family I had left. There wasn't. November was worse than October. December was worse than November. By January, Grandpa was mostly bedridden. I'd set up his room so he could see the television, kept books nearby he didn't have energy to read, brought him meals he couldn't eat. The hospice nurse, a kind woman named Lauren, came 3 times a week to check his vitals and adjust his medication. He's comfortable, she'd tell me, which I understood meant he's dying but not in agony. On a Wednesday in late January, Grandpa asked me to bring him something from the shop, his old toolbox, the one he'd inherited from his father. It was a heavy red metal chest with 3 drawers and a carrying tray on top, filled with tools that had built and repaired things for decades. I brought it to his room and set it beside the bed. Open the bottom drawer, he said. Inside was an envelope, along with a small bank book showing a savings account I'd never known existed. The account had $18,000 in it. I've been setting aside what I could, he said, for college, for whatever you needed. I couldn't speak. There's a letter in there too, for later, not now. Grandpa, listen to me. His voice was weak but firm. What happened with that scholarship, that wasn't about you. It wasn't about your work or your worth. It was about people protecting their own. That's how the world works sometimes. You can be angry about it. You should be angry about it, but don't let it break you. It already did. No, he said. It bent you. There's a difference. Broken things can't be fixed. Bent things can be straightened out if you're patient and careful and you understand what you're working with. He died 4 days later, on a Sunday morning while I was at the grocery store. Lauren called me at work. By the time I got home, he was gone, his body still in the bed where he'd spent the last 2 months, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. I sat with him for an hour before I called anyone, held his hand, which was already cold, told him things I should have said when he could hear them, apologized for not being able to save him, even though I knew there was nothing to apologize for. The funeral was small, a few customers from the shop, Mrs. Rivera from the high school, the waitress from Rosie's, Mr. Caldwell, who drove 2 hours to attend and left immediately after, not saying anything, because there was nothing to say. I stood at the grave while they lowered the casket and understood, with perfect clarity, that I was completely alone. The shop closed. I couldn't run it by myself, couldn't afford to keep the lease. I sold the equipment for what I could get, which wasn't much. The house went next. It had a reverse mortgage Grandpa had taken out years ago to cover repairs, and there was barely any equity left. I packed what mattered into the Ford Ranger and moved into a studio apartment on the other side of town, the kind of place where the rent was cheap because nobody wanted to live there. I had $18,000 from Grandpa's savings, a high school diploma, and a letter I hadn't opened yet. I opened it on a Friday night in February, sitting on a mattress on the floor of my apartment, drinking cheap beer I'd bought with a fake ID. The letter was handwritten in Grandpa's careful print. "Son, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. I'm sorry you had to watch me fade. I'm sorry for a lot of things I didn't get time to fix. The money in that account is yours. Use it for school, use it to start over, use it however you need. Don't waste it being angry at people who don't deserve that kind of power over you. Here's what I learned. Fixing engines for 50 years. Some things break because they're built wrong. Some things break because they're used wrong. And some things break because somebody broke them on purpose. The scholarship thing, that was somebody breaking something on purpose. You can't fix that by yourself. It's bigger than you. And trying to fix it will just break you too. But you can build something new. Something that works better. Something they can't touch. Don't try to beat them at their game. Build a different game entirely. Hardship doesn't break a person if they remain honest. It strengthens them. I love you. I'm proud of you. Go build something good." I read it 7 times. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the toolbox that was now mine. And I started building. The first thing I built was a plan. I sat in that apartment with a notebook and worked backward from where I wanted to be. I wanted a degree in engineering, specifically industrial engineering, with a focus on systems analysis. I wanted financial stability. I wanted to be the kind of person who couldn't be dismissed or investigated or told their work wasn't good enough. I wanted to be untouchable. The state engineering school was out. I'd deferred once, but the window was closing and the financial aid package wasn't renewable. Community college was the only realistic option. It wasn't glamorous, but it was affordable. With Grandpa's savings and what I could earn working full-time, I could get a 2-year degree without debt, then transfer to a 4-year school. I enrolled at Riverside Community College that spring. Took a full course load while working 40 hours a week at the grocery store. Slept 5 hours a night. Lived on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. Studied in the break room during lunch, in the parking lot before shifts, in the library until they kicked me out at midnight. It wasn't strategic or inspiring. It was grinding. Every day was the same. Wake up, go to class, go to work, study, sleep, repeat. No social life, no extracurriculars, no time for anything that wasn't directly moving me toward the goal. My grades were perfect. Not because I was brilliant, but because I had nothing else. Other students went to parties, had relationships, played video games, lived normal 20-year-old lives. I went to class and work and studied. That was the entire list. Professors noticed. Dr. Langston, who taught calculus, asked me to be a peer tutor. I said yes because it looked good on a transcript and paid better than the grocery store. Dr. Bennett, who taught physics, recommended me for a research assistant position, helping digitize old engineering archives. I said yes for the same reasons. Every opportunity was evaluated through a single lens. Does this get me closer? I transferred to state after 2 years with a 4.0 GPA, full junior standing, and a scholarship that covered most of tuition. I'd saved enough from work to cover the rest. No debt, no dependencies, no vulnerabilities. At state, I doubled down. I joined the Engineering Honor Society, led a project redesigning the campus recycling system. published a paper on supply chain optimization in a third-tier academic journal, graduated summa cum laude with departmental honors. None of it felt good. It felt necessary. The other students celebrated graduation with families and friends, taking photos and making plans. I attended the ceremony because it was required, picked up my diploma, and went home to apply for jobs. I'd targeted a specific type of position, entry-level roles at consulting firms that specialized in corporate auditing and compliance, not the glamorous side of engineering. I wasn't designing bridges or rockets. I was analyzing systems, finding weaknesses, writing reports about inefficiencies and risks. It was boring work, technical, detail-oriented, largely invisible. It was perfect. I got hired by Mercer and Associates, a mid-sized consulting firm based in the state capital. They put me on their financial systems team, evaluating internal controls for companies and organizations. My job was to look at how money moved through an organization, identify where processes broke down, and recommend fixes. I was good at it, better than good. The thing about growing up poor is that you learn to see systems clearly. You learn how money flows, where it pools, where it leaks. You learn which rules are real and which are just theater. You learn to spot the gaps between what organizations claim to do and what they actually do. And you learn to document everything. Within a year, I'd been promoted to senior analyst. Within 3 years, I was a project lead managing teams of auditors. Within 5 years, I was an associate partner, with my name on reports that went to boards of directors and regulatory agencies. I worked 80-hour weeks. I traveled constantly. I lived in hotels and airport lounges and conference rooms in cities whose names blurred together. I had no hobbies, no relationships that lasted longer than a few months, no life outside the work. People called me driven, dedicated, a rising star. What I was, actually, was waiting, because the thing about building a different game is that you have to build it before you can play it. And I'd spent 8 years building. The call came on a Tuesday in October. I was in my office reviewing audit reports when my assistant Taylor knocked on the door. "Client meeting in 15, she said. "New prospect, foundation audit." "Which foundation?" "The Prescott Family Foundation." I felt something shift in my chest, like a gear engaging after years of being idle. "Tell me about them," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Taylor pulled up the file on her tablet. Private charitable foundation established 1987. Assets around $40 million. Primarily focused on education grants. Scholarships, program funding, that kind of thing. They're applying for a state partnership grant, and the state requires an independent audit as part of the application. They specifically requested us because of our education sector work. "Who's the contact?" "The executive director, someone named Vanessa Prescott." Of course it was. "Tell them I'll handle it personally, ha," I said. "You sure? We could assign it to one of the senior associates. It's pretty straightforward." "I'm sure." The meeting was in our downtown conference room. I arrived 10 minutes early, reviewed the preliminary materials, and waited. Vanessa Prescott arrived exactly on time, accompanied by 2 people I didn't recognize, a younger man in an expensive suit, who was introduced as the foundation's legal counsel, and an accountant who handled their financial reporting. Mrs. Prescott looked older than I remembered, still polished, still wearing pearls and perfectly tailored clothes, but with lines around her eyes and gray threading through her blonde hair. She smiled professionally as we shook hands. She didn't recognize me. Why would she? I was just another consultant, one of dozens she'd probably met with over the years. A kid from a scholarship investigation 15 years ago wouldn't register, especially now that he was wearing a suit that cost more than the Ford Ranger had. "Thank you for meeting with us," she said, settling into a chair across the conference table. "We're excited about the state partnership opportunity, and we want to make sure everything is in order for the audit." "That's what we're here for," I said. "Why don't you walk me through the foundation structure and your grant-making process?" She launched into a presentation that was clearly well practiced. The Prescott Family Foundation, she explained, had been funding educational initiatives for over 3 decades. They awarded scholarships to deserving students, funded innovative programs in underserved schools, supported STEM education initiatives. Their work had helped thousands of students achieve their potential. "We take our responsibility very seriously," she said. "Every grant is carefully evaluated. We have rigorous standards for academic merit and demonstrated need." "And who conducts those evaluations?" I asked. "Our grants committee. It's composed of myself, 3 community members with backgrounds in education, and 2 rotating positions filled by local business leaders." "Do any committee members have children who've received foundation funding?" She hesitated for just a fraction of a second. "We have strict conflict of interest policies. Committee members recuse themselves from any decisions involving family members or close associates." "And are those recusals documented?" "Of course." I made a note on my tablet. "We'll need to review your committee meeting minutes for the past 7 years, along with all grant applications, award decisions, and recusal records." 7 years? The state only requires 3. Our firm's standard practice is 7 years for thorough due diligence. "It gives us a better picture of patterns over time," the lawyer interjected. "That's quite extensive. Some of those older records might not be readily available." "Then I suggest you start looking for them," I said pleasantly. "The audit can't proceed without complete documentation." Mrs. Prescott's smile tightened slightly. "Of course. We'll provide whatever you need." The meeting lasted an hour. I asked questions about their investment policies, their overhead costs, their decision-making processes. I asked about specific grants, asking them to explain the rationale. I asked about their relationship with the state education board, with local schools, with other foundations. Every answer went into my notes. As they were leaving, Mrs. Prescott paused at the door. "Can I ask how long you expect this audit to take?" "Depends on what we find," I said. "Could be a few weeks, could be longer. We'll be thorough." Of course, thoroughness is essential. After they left, Taylor came in with coffee. "Thoughts?" she asked. I said, "we're going to find some very interesting patterns." The audit took 3 months. 3 months of forensic analysis that peeled back layers of what the Prescott Family Foundation presented versus what it actually was. I assembled a team of 4 analysts, all people I trusted, all people who understood that this wasn't just another routine audit. I didn't tell them why it mattered. I just told them to dig deeper than they normally would, to question every assumption, to follow every thread, no matter how small. We started with the financial records. On the surface, everything looked clean. Money came in from investments and donations. Money went out in grants and operational costs. The ratios looked reasonable. About 82% of annual spending went to program costs, 18% to administration. Well within normal parameters for a foundation this size. But when we looked closer, the picture got more complicated. The investment portfolio was managed by a firm called Thornton Capital Management. The name caught my attention immediately. Mr. Thornton, the scholarship committee director from 15 years ago. A little research confirmed it was the same person. He'd left the scholarship administration role after a few years and started his own investment firm. The foundation had moved all its assets to his firm 7 years ago. Since then, they'd been paying him an annual management fee of 1.2% of assets under management, about $480,000 per year. That alone wasn't necessarily suspicious. Foundations hire investment managers, but the returns they'd been getting were mediocre. Over the 7-year period, their portfolio had underperformed the market by an average of 2.3% annually. They were paying premium fees for substandard results. One of my analysts, Morgan, flagged it first. Why would they stick with this manager, she asked. They could switch to a low-cost index fund approach and improve returns while cutting costs by 2/3. Good question, I said. Let's find out who authorized the change. To Thornton Capital. The meeting minutes from 7 years ago showed that the decision had been made by the Foundation's board of directors. The vote had been unanimous. The rationale cited was desire to work with a trusted advisor who understands our mission. Trusted advisor. I made a note of that phrase. Next, we looked at grant distributions. The Foundation awarded about 40 scholarships per year, ranging from $5,000 to full-ride awards worth $50,000 or more. They also funded various educational programs, after-school tutoring, STEM camps, teacher training initiatives. We built a database of every grant awarded over 7 years. Names, amounts, dates, stated, criteria, evaluation scores. Then we started looking for patterns. The patterns were damning. Over 7 years, the Foundation had awarded 127 major scholarships. Of those, 89 had gone to students from households earning over $150,000 annually. Only 23 had gone to students from households earning less than $50,000. The Foundation's stated mission was to support students from all economic backgrounds, with special emphasis on removing financial barriers to education. But in practice, they were primarily funding students who didn't need financial support. Then we looked at connections. Dylan, another analyst on my team, cross-referenced scholarship recipients against committee members. What he found was staggering. Over 7 years, 14 scholarships had gone to children of committee members or their immediate family. 26 had gone to children of major Foundation donors. 31 had gone to students who attended the same private schools as committee members' children. 18 had gone to students whose parents worked at companies owned by or affiliated with the Prescott family businesses. We'd found 89 scholarships with direct or indirect connections to Foundation insiders, out of 127 total awards. This is systemic, Morgan said, spreading the data across the conference room whiteboard. It's not a few bad apples, it's the entire orchard. But we needed more than patterns. We needed documentation of specific policy violations. We requested all grant applications and review materials. It took the Foundation 2 weeks to comply. They claimed the delay was due to archival challenges. But eventually, we got boxes of files delivered to our office. We divided them among the team and started reading. I took the year I cared about most, the year I'd applied for the Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship. The scholarship file contained 14 applications. I found mine, along with all the materials I'd submitted, my portfolio, my recommendations, my essay. Someone had attached notes to the file. Investigation initiated April 12th. Committee concern independent work verification. Application suspended pending review. Brandon Prescott's application was also in the file. His portfolio was impressive, detailed sustainability proposals, letters from Cornell professors he'd apparently worked with on a summer research program, a recommendation from the governor's office where he'd interned. What caught my attention was a handwritten note, paper clipped to the front of his file. Strong candidate. Family commitment to Foundation mission. Mother's recusal appropriate. Committee consensus. The note wasn't signed, but I recognized the handwriting from other documents. It was Mr. Thornton's. I kept reading, found the investigation report about my application. It was 3 pages long, summarizing the panel's review, my demonstration project, the interviews with teachers. The conclusion was carefully worded. While applicant demonstrates technical Capability, committee unable to definitively confirm independent completion of all portfolio elements. In abundance of caution, application denied. Right below it was the award decision. Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship awarded to Brandon Prescott. Unanimous committee vote, Prescott recusal noted. I sat with those documents for a long time. Then I kept digging. The foundation had a conflict of interest policy adopted in 2003. It required committee members to recuse themselves from any decisions involving immediate family members or financial relationships that could create appearance of impropriety. Mrs. Prescott had recused herself from the vote on Brandon's scholarship. That was documented. What wasn't documented was her participation in the investigation of my application. She'd been at that initial meeting, had asked questions, had raised concerns. But there was no recusal note, no acknowledgement that investigating the competing candidate while her son was applying might constitute a conflict of interest. The policy violation was clear, the impact was obvious, and it fit a pattern we were seeing across multiple years. We found 6 other cases where committee members had initiated challenges to applications from students who were competing with their own children or relatives. In every case, the challenge had resulted in the competing student being disqualified or receiving a reduced award. In every case, the committee member's relative had subsequently received funding. This is a fraud, Dillon said. They're using foundation resources to benefit insiders while pretending to serve the public interest. Can we prove it holds up in court? I asked. With this documentation? Absolutely. We compiled everything into a preliminary report. 200 pages of analysis, data tables, and specific examples of policy violations. I reviewed it 3 times, checking every citation, every claim, every piece of evidence. It was airtight. I scheduled a meeting with Mrs. Prescott to review our findings. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a Thursday in December. Mrs. Prescott arrived with her full team, the lawyer, the accountant, and this time 2 additional people, Mr. Thornton and Brandon Prescott. Brandon was 32 now, working as a sustainability consultant for his father's development company. He'd graduated from Cornell, gotten an MBA from Wharton, and spent the past decade building a career in the family business. He looked successful. Expensive suit, confident posture, the ease of someone who'd never had to question whether he belonged somewhere. He still didn't recognize me. Neither did his mother. We settled around the conference table. I had my team with me, Morgan, Dillon, and 2 other analysts. We'd prepared a presentation walking through our findings. I started with the easy stuff, the investment management fees, the underperforming portfolio, the administrative costs that were higher than necessary. These are areas for improvement, I said, but they're not disqualifying. You could address them through policy changes. Mrs. Prescott relaxed slightly. We appreciate the feedback. We're always looking to optimize our operations. However, I continued, there are more serious concerns. I pulled up the data on grant distributions, showed them the demographic breakdown, showed them the concentration of awards going to high-income families, showed them the pattern of insider connections. Your stated mission is to remove financial barriers to education, I said. But in practice, you're primarily funding students who don't face those barriers. Over 70% of your major scholarships go to families earning above the state median income. The lawyer started to speak, but I kept going. More concerning is the systematic, preferential treatment of scholarship candidates connected to committee members and foundation donors. Over 7 years, we identified 89 awards with direct or indirect connections to foundation insiders. That's 70% of all major scholarships. I let that number sit. This isn't a few isolated incidents, Morgan added, pulling up specific examples on the screen. It's a pattern of using foundation resources to benefit the families of the people controlling those resources. We have strict conflict of interest policies, Mrs. Prescott started, which are violated regularly, I said. I pulled up the policy document and the meeting minutes, side by side. Your policy requires recusal from decisions involving family members, but it doesn't address participation in preliminary processes, like investigations of competing candidates. I pulled up the documents from my scholarship year, put them on the screen for everyone to see. In 2011, Brandon Prescott applied for the Whitman Engineering Excellence Scholarship. A competing applicant was subjected to an investigation initiated by Mrs. Prescott, who questioned whether the applicant's work was actually his own. The investigation resulted in the competing application being denied. Brandon Prescott received the scholarship. Mrs. Prescott recused herself from the final vote, but participated in the investigation that removed the competition. I watched Brandon's face, saw the moment of recognition, not of me specifically, but of the situation. He remembered that year. He'd told me about it himself, 15 years ago in the high school hallway, explaining how I'd brought the investigation on myself. Who was the competing applicant? The lawyer asked. That's not relevant to the policy violation, I said. What's relevant is the pattern. We found 6 similar cases. Committee members initiating challenges to candidates competing with their relatives, participating in investigations or evaluations that led to those candidates being disqualified, then recusing themselves only from the final vote after the competition had been eliminated. The recusal was documented, Mr. Thornton said. The recusal was theater, I cut in. It created the appearance of propriety while allowing the outcome to be predetermined. That's not compliance with policy. That's manipulation of process. Mrs. Prescott's face had gone pale. You're taking isolated incidents and constructing a narrative. I'm documenting a pattern of behavior that violates both your stated policies and the legal requirements for charitable foundations. And that's before we get to the financial relationships. I pulled up the investment management data. Mr. Thornton serves as the foundation's investment manager, collecting approximately $480,000 annually in fees while delivering below-market returns. He previously served as director of the scholarship committee that awarded grants to his current clients. That's a conflict of interest that should have been disclosed and managed. Instead, it appears to be the basis for an ongoing business relationship. Mr. Thornton stood up. This is outrageous. We're terminating this engagement. You can't terminate an audit required by the state, Dylan said calmly. And even if you could, we've already documented everything we need for our report. What report? Brandon asked. His voice was tight. The audit report we're required to file with the state as part of your partnership grant application, which will also be submitted to the IRS and made available to the public, as required by law for organizations claiming charitable status. The room went very quiet. You're trying to destroy us, Mrs. Prescott said. Her voice had lost its professional polish. She sounded raw, almost desperate. Over what? Some misunderstanding from 15 years ago? This is a vendetta. This is an audit, I said. You hired us to evaluate your compliance with legal and ethical standards. We did that. What we found was systematic misuse of foundation resources to benefit insiders, violations of your own conflict of interest, policies, and financial arrangements that appear designed to funnel foundation assets to related parties. We help students, she said. We've helped thousands of students. You've helped the children of your friends and donors while denying opportunities to students who actually needed them, including students whose work was good enough to earn funding, but whose backgrounds made them inconvenient. Brandon finally made the connection. I could see it in his eyes. The kid from the high school hallway, the one he'd dismissed as bitter and unstable, was now sitting across from him in a suit that cost as much as his, holding the power to dismantle everything his family had built. You, he said. Me, I confirmed. "This is personal," he said to the room. "He's doing this because he didn't get a scholarship 15 years ago. This whole audit is revenge." "The audit is factual analysis based on documented evidence," Morgan said. "The findings would be identical regardless of who conducted the review." "But he's not unbiased." "Neither are you," I said. "But the data doesn't care about bias. The policy violations exist. The financial irregularities exist. The pattern of insider benefit exists. Whether I conduct this audit or someone else does, the outcome is the same. Your foundation has been operating as a private benefit organization while claiming charitable status. That's illegal." The meeting ended shortly after that. Mrs. Prescott and her team left without another word, the lawyer already on his phone calling someone. After they were gone, Morgan turned to me. "That was personal, though, wasn't it?" "Yes," I said, "but it was also true." The audit report was filed in January. 300 pages of documentation, analysis, and recommendations. The State Partnership Grant Office received it first, then the IRS. Then, as required by law, it was made available to the public through the Foundation's tax filings. The press picked it up within days. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Prestigious Foundation faces scrutiny over insider benefits." The state capital paper followed with a more detailed investigation, interviewing some of the students who'd been denied scholarships while connected applicants received funding. One of those students was me. The reporter found the records of my application and investigation, connected it to my current role at Mercer & Associates, and wrote a compelling narrative about a kid who'd been wrongly denied opportunity, returning years later, to expose the system that had failed him. I declined to be interviewed, issued a statement through my firm's PR office, saying that I'd recused myself from any subjective decisions in the audit, and that all findings had been reviewed and verified by independent analysts. It was true. Morgan had double-checked everything, as had Dylan. The report would have been identical if I'd never been involved. But the narrative was powerful. The press loved it. The state launched a formal investigation. The IRS opened a review of the Foundation's tax-exempt status. Donors started pulling funding. The state partnership grant application was denied. The Foundation's board of directors held an emergency meeting. Mr. Thornton resigned from his investment management role. 2 other committee members stepped down. Mrs. Prescott offered to resign as executive director, but the board refused to accept it. At least initially, they needed someone to manage the crisis. But the crisis kept getting worse. In February, the state attorney general's office announced they were investigating potential fraud in the Foundation's grant-making process. They subpoenaed records, interviewed former committee members, and started tracing the connections between scholarship recipients and Foundation insiders. In March, the IRS suspended the Foundation's tax-exempt status pending review. Without that status, donations dried up completely. The Foundation's investment portfolio, already diminished by donor withdrawals, couldn't generate enough income to sustain operations. The Prescott family tried to save it. Brandon's father, whose development company had been a major donor, offered to make a substantial contribution to stabilize the finances. But the Attorney General's office indicated that any new funding would be scrutinized for potential attempts to obstruct their investigation. The money never came. In April, the board voted to suspend all grant operations. They'd continue paying minimal administrative costs while the investigations proceeded, but they couldn't award any new scholarships or fund any new programs. In May, Mrs. Prescott resigned. The board accepted it this time. The Foundation issued a statement thanking her for her years of service and expressing commitment to addressing the concerns raised in the audit. The Foundation that had operated for 34 years, that had awarded millions in scholarships, that had the Prescott name on buildings and programs throughout the state, was effectively dead. The Prescott family's commercial interests suffered too. The negative publicity created distance between the family name and business success. Some local government contracts that had seemed certain fell through. A major development project faced unexpected permitting challenges. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to create real financial pressure. And through it all, I watched from a distance. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I didn't make public statements or give interviews beyond the minimum required by professional obligation. I just went back to work. 6 months after the audit report went public, I received a phone call. It was Brandon Prescott. "I need to talk to you," he said, "in person." I considered hanging up, decided I wanted to hear what he had to say. We met at a coffee shop near my office, neutral territory. Public enough that the conversation would stay civil. He looked different than he had in the conference room, tired, older. The easy confidence had been replaced with something more careful, more guarded. "I wanted to apologize," he said, after we'd ordered coffee and settled at a corner table. I waited. For what happened in high school, for what my mother did, for all of it. I didn't understand then. I thought you were just angry about not getting what you wanted. I didn't realize. He stopped, started again. The audit showed me things I didn't know. Patterns I'd never seen, because I never had to look, and I'm sorry. "Okay," I said. "Is that it? Just okay? What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. I guess I thought..." He trailed off, staring at his coffee. "I thought maybe we could talk about what happened, about how to fix it." "There's nothing to fix. The foundation is gone. The investigation is out of your hands. There's nothing left to do. I meant fix things between us." I almost laughed. "There is no us. There never was. You were a kid who got opportunities because of who your family was. I was a kid who didn't. We didn't have a relationship then, and we don't have one now. But I want to make it right." "You can't." "Why not?" I looked at him, really looked at him, saw someone who'd spent his entire life believing that problems could be solved with the right combination of money, connections, and good intentions. Someone who thought an apology and a conversation could erase 15 years of consequences. "Your mother launched an investigation into my scholarship application while you were applying for the same scholarship. She questioned whether I'd actually done my own work. She helped create an environment where teachers and administrators looked at me like I was a fraud. And when I tried to fight back, people told me I was bitter and unstable. I kept my voice level, factual. Because of that investigation, I lost the scholarship that would have let me take care of my grandfather when he was dying. He postponed. Treatment we couldn't afford anyway. He died. I spent the next 8 years rebuilding everything from nothing, working 80-hour weeks, living in a studio apartment, having no life outside of climbing back to a place where I'd have enough power that no one could dismiss me again." Brandon's face had gone pale. "I did all of that. I built a career. I became the kind of person who conducts audits of foundations and corporations. And when your family's foundation came across my desk, I did my job. I found the problems. I documented them. I filed the report. But you knew it would destroy. I knew it would expose violations that should have been addressed years ago. Whether that destroyed the foundation or forced it to reform wasn't my concern. My job was accuracy. I was accurate. You could have recused yourself, let someone else handle it. I could have. I didn't, because I wanted to be the one who held the light, while everyone looked at what your family had built. I wanted you to understand what it feels like when someone with power decides you don't deserve the thing you worked for." Silence. "So no," I continued. "You can't make it right. You can apologize. You can feel bad about it. You can try to be better going forward, but you can't give me back the years I spent alone, working myself to exhaustion, missing my grandfather's final months because I was too busy trying to survive. You can't undo that. No one can. Brandon stared at his coffee. I didn't know about your grandfather, I'm sorry. That's not your fault. What is your fault? What is your family's fault? Is building a system designed to protect people like you, at the expense of people like me, then acting surprised when someone finally points out what you were doing. He looked up. What do you want from me? Nothing, I said. And I meant it. There has to be something. There isn't. We're not going to be friends. We're not going to have some healing moment where I forgive you and we both move on feeling better about ourselves. This conversation doesn't change anything. Then why did you agree to meet? Good question. I'd asked myself the same thing. Because I wanted you to understand that you don't get to move past this just by apologizing. You get to live with it. You get to know that your success was built on a foundation that hurt people, and that when it was examined honestly, it collapsed. You get to sit with that. And maybe you'll build something different going forward. But that's your work, not mine. I stood up. Wait, he said. Is that it? That's it. So we just, what? Pretend we don't know each other if we cross paths? We don't know each other, I said. We never did. I left him sitting there. 3 years later, I made partner at Mercer & Associates. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, equity in the firm, and my name on the letterhead. I bought a house, not a mansion, not something designed to impress, just a solid 3-bedroom in a good neighborhood. I furnished it carefully, deliberately, choosing each piece the way Grandpa used to choose tools, for quality and durability, not flash. In the spare bedroom, I set up his old toolbox. I'd kept every tool, cleaned and maintained them, even though I rarely had time to use them anymore. Sometimes I'd go in there and just look at them, remembering the shop, the smell of motor oil and metal shavings, the quiet rhythm of work that actually fixed things. The Prescott Family Foundation never recovered. The state investigation concluded that there had been systematic violations of charitable trust laws. The foundation was required to pay substantial fines and restitution. The remaining assets were transferred to a state-managed education fund. Mrs. Prescott faced no criminal charges. The violations were serious but didn't rise to the level of prosecutable fraud. She'd broken ethical rules and abused trust, but she'd done it in ways that were just, legal enough to escape criminal liability. She retired from public life. The foundation work that had defined her legacy was gone. I followed what happened to some of the other people from that time. Mr. Caldwell retired from teaching and wrote a textbook on physics education. Mrs. Rivera took a job with the state education department. Mr. Thornton's investment firm went under after several clients pulled their money following the scandal. Brandon Prescott continued working in his father's business. I'd occasionally see his name in the business section of the paper, usually in connection with sustainability initiatives or corporate responsibility programs. Maybe he'd learned something. Maybe he was trying to build something better. I didn't particularly care. What I cared about was what I'd started building myself. I used a portion of my partnership earnings to establish a charitable fund, not a foundation with a board and committees, just a simple donor-advised fund that I controlled personally. It specifically supported students who were serving as primary caregivers for family members with serious illnesses. The grants covered medical expenses, living costs, and educational expenses. Recipients got stipends to replace income from part-time jobs so they could focus on school and caregiving. They got tutoring support and mental health resources. They got someone checking in to make sure they weren't drowning. I didn't name it after myself or my grandfather. Kept it low profile, just another fund among thousands. But it was real, and it helped people who were living the life I'd lived. Each year, I reviewed applications personally, read every essay, looked at every situation. tried to identify the kids who were working themselves to exhaustion while watching someone they loved fade away. I funded about 15 students a year, gave them enough to make a real difference. Some went on to become engineers, some became doctors or teachers or social workers. Some just survived and found whatever path worked for them. Every year, on the anniversary of Grandpa's death, I'd visit his grave. I'd bring the letter he'd written me and read it again, even though I'd long since memorized every word. Don't try to beat them at their game. Build a different game entirely. I'd built it. The game where merit mattered, where documentation was everything, where systems could be examined and frauds could be exposed, where someone with the right training and enough patience could hold power accountable. I'd won that game. I'd exposed the Prescott Foundation. I'd built a successful career. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to prove. But Grandpa's letter had another line I thought about more often as the years passed. Hardship doesn't break a person if they remain honest. It strengthens them. I wasn't sure he was right about that. The hardship had strengthened some parts of me, my discipline, my analytical skills, my ability to work long hours and solve complex problems, but it had broken other parts. The parts that trusted people easily, the parts that could form close relationships, the parts that could be happy with success without always looking for the next fight. I dated occasionally, but nothing lasted. Most relationships ended when the other person realized I had no interest in talking about my past, no interest in letting them in past a certain point, no interest in building the kind of intimate partnership that requires vulnerability. I had colleagues I respected. I had professional relationships built on competence and mutual interest. But I didn't have friends, not really. I didn't have people I called just to talk, people I'd trust with anything that mattered. I had my work, I had my charitable fund, I had my house and my comfortable life and my name on the letterhead. And I had the knowledge that I'd made sure no foundation could operate the way the Prescotts had without facing consequences. I'd built systems and standards that made it harder for people like Mrs. Prescott to use charitable organizations as vehicles for insider benefit. I'd trained dozens of analysts to look for the patterns I'd found, to document the violations, to hold organizations accountable. I'd changed things in small but real ways, but I'd also become someone I wasn't sure I liked very much. I worked constantly, not because I needed the money anymore, but because work was what I knew how to do. It was safe. It had clear objectives and measurable outcomes. It didn't require me to feel things I'd spent years learning not to feel. Sometimes I'd wake up at 3 a.m., thinking about the kid I'd been at 17, the one who'd believed the world was fundamentally fair, the one who'd thought hard work and honesty would be enough, the one who'd sat in the shop with his grandfather and learned to fix things. That kid was gone. I'd replaced him with someone harder, colder, more effective, someone who couldn't be hurt because he didn't let anyone close enough to hurt him, someone who'd built walls so thick that nothing could get through. Not affection, not grief, not joy, not anything that might make him vulnerable again. I'd won. I'd proven I was better than them. I'd achieved success on my own terms, and I'd given away the parts of myself that might have actually enjoyed it. On a Sunday morning in late fall, I drove out to Rosie's, the diner where Grandpa used to take me. It was under new management, and Danielle had retired, but the pancakes were the same. I sat in a booth by myself, ordered eggs and hash browns, and looked out the window at the empty parking lot. I thought about building something different, about whether it was possible to become someone who could trust again, who could let people in, who could be more than the sum of the injustices he'd overcome. I thought about the students I'd helped through the charitable fund, about whether any of them would end up like me, successful but hollow, powerful but alone. I hoped not. I hoped they'd find a way to be strong without being hard, to be effective without being cold, to win without losing themselves in the process. I finished my breakfast, left a generous tip, and drove back to the house. In the spare bedroom, I opened Grandpa's toolbox and pulled out the letter one more time. Go build something good. I'd built something. Whether it was good, whether I was good, I still wasn't sure. But I was still here. Still building, still trying to fix things properly, the way he'd taught me. Not loudly, not perfectly, just honestly. And maybe that was enough. The foundation scandal was 3 years behind me. The students I'd helped were out there somewhere, building their own lives. The systems I'd changed were working, making it harder for the next kid to get crushed by corruption. I'd proven everything I'd set out to prove, but standing in that room with the tools my grandfather had left me, I understood the final truth of the story. I'd won, and it had changed me in ways I'd never be able to undo. The price of power, I'd learned, wasn't paid in money or time. It was paid in the parts of yourself you had to give away to get it. And once you'd given them away, you couldn't get them back, no matter how much you won. Stories like this happen more often than we think. Subscribe if you want to hear the ones that usually stay unspoken. And if this story made you pause, a like helps the channel grow.